Hello, I am Deb Coviello, the Drop-In CEO, and I want to thank you for joining us on another episode where week after week I just meet the most amazing people and share their insights with you. And I know along the way they are going to inspire you. And I ask if you love this episode, please subscribe, rate, review, and please tell others about this amazing resource because we can all help the C suite leader of today and tomorrow to navigate their challenges with confidence. And today it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Mark O'Brien, who is the owner and principal of O'Brien Communications Group, a B2B brand management and marketing communications firm he founded in 2004. He is also the host of the Anxious Voyage, a program about life's trials and triumphs on the global syndication Dream Vision 7 radio and TV network. He is also a lifetime writer, and you can find all of his published work on Amazon under Mark Nelson O'Brien. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I love the fact that you express your gratitude to me when I am the one who's grateful to be here. So thank you.
You know, it's about humanity. We need to express more gratitude because, again, we may differ on things, different points of view, but at the end of the day, we're all part of this web of humanity. And just be grateful. And somebody said this another day up in the earth is another good day. And again, I am looking forward to this conversation. But for my listeners, I have the good grace of being introduced to Mark. It was really interesting. I was on Rabbi Yonasson's Goldson's podcast, Grappling with the Gray, and he really, really enjoyed some of our talking points with one of the guests. He says, I have to have you on the show, the Anxious Voyager podcast. So I had the good fortune of sharing some of my insights with Mark and a panel of amazing people. So I had to invite him on to my show, and I know this is going to be an amazing conversation. But at first, I just share a bit about your backstory with my audience, and then you never know where the conversation may go.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. I have to say that for a significant portion of my life, I literally felt lost. Um, as a result of those two guitars back there and others, I was 28 years old before I got to college. Um, Thought I would earn a bachelor's degree and go on to grad school and ultimately teach. But by the time I finished my undergrad degree, I was married with two sons and didn't have the time, frankly, or the financial means to go to grad school. So I went to work. Um, I ended up, believe it or not, working for a succession of three insurance companies. Finally ended up at a small public relations agency, went from there to a larger advertising and public relations agency. And then in 2004, I'm so sorry. In 2004, I just decided that I needed to test myself. And I needed to know if I could survive by my own wits. So I will tell you, recognizing fully that I will reveal my age, on January 30th, 2004, my 50th birthday, I gave my notice at the ad agency. And the gentleman that I worked for, I went in at 8 o'clock in the morning. The gentleman I worked for closed the door and he kept me in there till 10:30, telling me I'll never make it. This is a young man's business. You'll never be able to retire, et cetera, et cetera. And I sat and listened to him, got up, shook his hand, thanked him, stayed another 2 weeks because I gave him a reasonable notice and went on my way. That's 20 plus years ago, and here we are.
So this is so inspiring. And, I've known you for a while, but I don't think I quite knew that story. And for me, it gives me confidence that I too went out on my own, kicked out of the nest when I was 50, something or other, and said, I believe on myself. I want to bet on myself. I have grown so much from the experience that just because you hit 50 or something more than that doesn't mean you're dead yet. You still got more to go.
And I at one point, and that moment when I gave my notice, that birthday was one of those moments when I started to realize that if I'm a spiritual person, I'm not going to say I'm a religious person, but if you accept the notion as I do that there is some grand plan for you or something, I finally figured out that it wasn't my job to know what the plan was. My plan was to understand that there would be incidents and people and signs put on my path. And my job would be to recognize those, to interpret them, and to make the most responsible decisions I could. So I'm going to tell you this. On my way home, on my 50th birthday, after having given my notice, I was terrified. I don't mean I was nervous, I mean I was terrified. And my older sister called. And she called for two reasons. She called to wish me a happy birthday. And she called to tell me that her husband had just been diagnosed with prostate cancer. And I knew her husband well enough to know this is a retired naval officer, completely squared away. He was going to research his treatment options. He was going to choose the one he thought was best, and he was going to beat that cancer, which is exactly what happened. But I got home that night and I was thinking, and my brother-in-law's name is Dickie. And I was thinking, wow, Dickie is staring down the barrel of cancer, and you're the one who's terrified? Come on. And I thought, there it is. That's a sign right there. And the only thing that scared me more than not doing that at 50 was the idea of waking up at 60 and wondering, come on, what would have happened if you had tried? And I couldn't do that. I couldn't look back that way after not having tried.
So there was obviously something that led up to this. Was it you just woke up one day and said that's it? Or was this a series of conversations with your significant other to say, will you support me? This is what I need to do. How did you lead up to, guess what? I'm going to quit today. Here's my 2 weeks. What preceded that?
Um, a couple of things. I don't want to be misunderstood. I love the two people who own the agencies where I worked. I do. I still do. But I watched them do things that I did not think were conducive to long-term trusting relationships with clients. So that was one. And the second one was, and I found this too in my previous corporate life, I didn't feel like I was being allowed to contribute to the best of my abilities. And as a writer, I didn't think that my creative potential was being tapped. So I don't know if you've ever read Michael Gerber's book, The E-Myth Revisited. Michael Gerber, for the purposes of his book, divides the world into two kinds of people: entrepreneurs, that's what the E stands for, and tacticians. And he said most businesses are not started by entrepreneurs. They're started by tacticians who have what he calls the entrepreneurial convulsion.
Mhm.
That's what I had. I thought, oh, I could do that, or I could do that better. So I initially started because I wanted to create a place in which I could respond to those creative challenges. And one of the things that Gerber says is tacticians who experience the entrepreneurial convulsion create new places in which to work rather than creating businesses, on which to work. And that changed everything. And I realized after reading that book that what I really enjoyed and really relish still is the bigger problem solving. The creative aspect of it is part of it, but it's tactical execution. What I really enjoy is the strategic, consultative problem solving and big picture thinking.
Hmm. So thank you for all of that because again, this is why I do these interviews. While my listeners, hey, listeners out there, I'm hopefully you're getting insights from Mark and being inspired. But honestly, I'm getting inspired because again, you know, I wonder if I was always an entrepreneur. When I was a child, I would make arts and crafts. I'd sell things. I would always be seeking ways to one, create, and two, to monetize it. And then I fell in line, and it was the right thing to do. Getting my education, going to college, having a well-paying job, spouse, supportive, the American dream. Then got into a little bit of trouble over our heads, too much going on, the craziness, etc. And then now reaching a level of maturity, and then just kind of realizing I'm a creative. I've always wanted to make things, create things. And again, podcasting, that's part of it. I love communicating. I love listening and being inspired. And I honestly believe, even though I am the drop-in CEO, I help businesses with their business issues during transition. But honestly, just talking to you, there is something out there greater that I trust. I will be speaking. I will be helping leaders to get unstuck from where they're at. I want to be their support system, there's number two, what have you. And what you said was just, it's almost, I'm calling it trust the process, trust the universe, be aware to those signs. And that's really important for my listeners. Be highly aware.
I'm not I'm not a follower or a devotee of Simon Sinek. But I was having a conversation with a woman once who is very much enamored of him. And she said to me, if you had to express to me your why in 5 words, could you do it? So I'm a writer, so I cheated and I hyphenated. I said, I write to restore self-faith. And then I paused a moment and I said, and I don't mean mine. I don't understand why people abandon their self-faith, because we all come from a place, childhood, at which we're fearless and curious and intrigued by wonder,
Yeah.
and not hindered with doubt. And I don't know what happens in the transition.
I agree. I talk about this. That's why we're having this wonderful conversation right now. I talk about uncertainty and taking risk. And a child will jump out of a tree because it's fun. Look how high I climbed, and look, I can make it to the earth and maybe not hurt myself. There's no fear there. And then we step into the education system, and we're red marks on our paper because we didn't get it exactly right. And we're further sometimes squelched our creativity or our thoughts in corporate. If we're not in the right environment, we retract. And some people never find their true creative self again. And I really appreciate that because I think I'm on the same journey with you.
Yeah, and given what you just said, I'll tell you another story. As a late blooming college student, I took a course at I graduated from Trinity College in Hartford. I took a literature course, and in that course we read Moby Dick, and in that course we were asked to write our interpretations of Moby Dick. So I am very, very enamored of Joseph Campbell and his studies in mythology. So I wrote a mythological interpretation of Moby Dick with, all of the archetypes and everything else you would imagine to find. And I got a terrible grade. And so I stayed after class. And I said, Professor Wheatley, can you help me out here? And he said, well, yeah, that's not what Moby Dick means. And I said, oh, I'm not sure I follow you. What it means? I thought you asked for my interpretation. And he pulled out a zippered satchel, and he unzippered it and he started digging through it. And he pulled out a spiral bound notebook and started thumbing through it. And as he was doing it, I was able to recognize that it was from his graduate school studies. And the man was 56 years old at the time. And he said, here's what Moby Dick means. And he started reading that paper that he had written to me. And I said, you know what, Professor Wheatley, thank you very much. We're good. But at that moment, I needed to trust myself enough to know that my interpretation and his interpretation weren't any more or less valid. They were interpretations. That's what interpretations are. But I also recognized, and given the fact that I was older than the typical students at the time, I could have let myself be beaten up by that. And I might not have recognized that what we were talking about is interpretation.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
self-faith, I think, is utterly critical.
So inspiring, which brings me a little bit closer now to your headline. I was looking at your LinkedIn headline, and you, of course, said, I am a writer, I am a brand manager, but you also say, and a master of contextual authenticity.
Oh man.
And I just don't know exactly what that means. What is your interpretation, or what is that meant to be?
Well, thank you for asking the question. First of all, um, I put it there on something of a dare because I was in a Zoom conversation with 25 or 30 people that was about authenticity. And I said, look, I get the whole authenticity thing, but by the same token, to use a football analogy, we have to be able to read the defense. And I said, for example, in my corporate life, if I had been in every instance my authentic self, my authentic ass would have been shown the authentic door. So the way we apply authenticity has to be dependent on context. And one of the gentlemen on the call said, he laughed. He said, I dare you to put that in your LinkedIn profile. And so I did. But as it turns out, just yesterday, I was in another conversation with that same group of people that was about neurodivergence. And one of the people who was leading the call said that she was, and this is an adult woman. She's on the autism spectrum and she's been diagnosed with ADHD. And she said, I didn't realize that a lot of the things that I was doing were wrong. And when I had the opportunity to speak, I said to her, when you said that, it felt like a punch in the head to me because who gets to decide that you were wrong? Maybe you're just more insightful. Maybe you're just more aware. Maybe you're ahead. And part of the reason I could say that is that I once had as a client a psychologist who specialized in learning and behavioral disorders for children. And he considered ADHD to be an advantage. And this gentleman was militantly anti medication and practiced neurofeedback training. But what he explained to me and what was validated by interviews he let me conduct with his child patients and their parents is that children with ADHD are perceived to be disruptive, particularly in public school classrooms, because they're trying to bring everybody up to their attentional threshold, which is what the doctor called it. So, I mean, to I don't know, to blame or to assign or try to find boxes for people, that's just,
Oh,
well, it's nuts and it's wrong.
so I'm laughing here. And again, for you, those of you watching on the YouTube channel, you're seeing me laugh here and holding my tongue. Oh my, they probably would have put my son, my middle son, on medication because if he wanted to talk to somebody, he would get up and walk over to that person. If the teacher just wasn't really organized, he would go off and do his own thing. He was labeled disruptive. I know they wanted to put him in special classes, but he simply marched to his own beat. If he didn't respect a teacher, if they weren't going fast enough, it's like, and he's very intelligent, never had to put on medication. And you know what? He has always done his own thing and has not cared about what society says. And then, unfortunately, there are those like that teacher, that grad school teacher that puts people in a box and says good or bad. But you know what? You got me thinking I might be ADHD undiagnosed because I have found coping mechanisms
I don't
to
doubt that I am.
focus, to focus. But I was talented. I was bright. I was always, top of my class. At one point, I actually got bored and I was starting to decelerate because I wasn't being challenged enough. So they jumped me a grade and I was finally intellectually challenged for the first time. But Gosh, misdiagnosing people, putting people in a box. Please, anybody out there, whether it's yourself or children, please question what people think about you. Because one, is it relevant? Do you agree or not? And gosh darn it, just go march to your own beat.
We have a grandson, and our son Sean and his wife Lauren will tell you that he is on the spectrum. And there are times, and we just had him with us for a week. There are times when you can talk to him and he's not there. But he and his younger sister go to a private school in Raleigh, North Carolina. And thankfully, the teachers in that school have come to understand their students. So our grandson's name is Evan. Evan will be in the classroom and he will appear to be in his own world somewhere or not paying attention or listening. And at the end of every quarter, he has all A's and he's on the honor roll. I mean, all you can do for a kid like that is let him do his thing and get out of his way.
Hmm. Okay, very inspirational. I'm going to turn this around a little bit. So, your podcast, I was a guest on your podcast, but I don't think I've ever really gone into the purpose of it. The name of the podcast, the Anxious Voyage podcast, where it's about life's trials and triumphs. I'm just curious about the origin of the name of it. And your intention behind it, because some of it, some podcasts are business development, some are just to create content and get it out there to be number one. I'm really curious, what is the purpose of it? Because there's got to be something behind here. It's interesting.
Okay, I'm going to tell you the purpose of it first. The purpose of it is to invite people to come on and share their stories. And you and I were talking about this a little bit before we started to record. And you were talking about humanity. The idea that we cannot learn from each other, regardless of who we are, that's just crazy to me. And so I started the show with the purpose of having people come on and tell their stories so that members of our audience could understand that we're actually quite alike. And that if somebody finds the wherewithal to do something, those people in the audience can also find that wherewithal, regardless of what it is they want to do. But then I discovered something else, which is that the people who come on the show, in telling their stories, acquire greater senses of their own agency. And so maybe we could call that self-worth in the context of the earlier part of our conversations. But they can understand their own gifts or their own power or their own ability to influence other people in their lives. Now I want to tell you particularly how it came about. And I'm sorry if this is a shameless plug, but the publisher of this book, which is my most recent, has a radio show on the same network. And a year ago, June, she had invited me to be on her program, and it was on a Tuesday evening at 5 o'clock. And after the program, I was thinking, wow, that might be really cool to have a show like that. 2 days later, Thursday, the same week, I was invited to an event here in Connecticut at which 13 women had been invited to present their concepts for a health-related startup. And then, there was some investment money, some private equity money up for grabs in levels 1, 2, and 3. Two of the women that I thought were most compelling, whose business ideas I thought were most valuable, were completely overlooked. So I introduced myself to each of them separately, and I said, you are absolutely welcome to think I'm nuts, but I'm going to find a way to help you. And when I got back in my car, I'm not a person that this happens to. When I got back in my car, that idea of the radio show felt so clearly like purpose. And the very next day, I called the owner of the station, and her name is Deborah. And I said, hello, Deborah, you don't know me. And she cut me off and she said, yes, I do. You're Mark O'Brien. And I said, how do you know that? She said, "Oh, because you were on Teresa Velarde's show Tuesday night and I recognize your voice." And I said, "That is astonishing." So I told her what I wanted to do. And I called it the Anxious Voyage. One, because it was the name of an honors seminar that I was invited to participate in when I was 28 years old. And two, because that's what life is. Life is an anxious voyage. And I think we can all make that voyage less anxious if we just talk to each other, if we just do what you and I are doing right now, because we share so much. And once we realize that, everything changes. And you know what? Uh, Under the heading of vulnerability is strength, I'll tell you this. Um, in the late 90s, I had an absolutely horrific episode of depression, absolutely debilitating. I now consider that to be a gift. And what I learned from that is you're never alone. If you think you're alone, you're fooling yourself. And two, you can overcome much more than you think you can. And people would tell me, Mark, you're not yourself right now, but you will be again. And I didn't believe them, but they were exactly right. And so that's part of the reason that I consider that to be a gift. And it also, um, it's a source of humility. It's a reminder, actually, I think of two things: that we all have weaknesses, and to act like we don't it's just a really bad joke. And it also helped me move beyond the idea that whatever I might have been experiencing was singular, because that's part of depression's trap. It makes you think nobody else has ever been through this. Nobody else has ever suffered like this. That's ridiculous. There are just way too many people on the planet for that to be true.
I sincerely appreciate you being vulnerable and bearing your soul because I think in humanity we need to do a bit more of that. We try to hold back because it's a source of weakness if we share those kinds of things, but I really appreciate your perspective that you're just a positive person, even though you've had some moments of doubt, maybe long moments of doubt. Your resiliency comes from your positivity of being able to say, there's a reason for this. Right
Yeah.
now, this, and again, to my listeners, I'm in a place like that right now. Again, I have lived a life, a career, and a journey. We probably already touched on that, where I thought everything was in my control. I was very tactical. I had a strategy I could execute, and I trusted myself and no one else. And then when things didn't go my way, then you'd go, oh, shoot, well, I'm just going to go in a different direction and go, 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 go. And one of those things, again, maybe it is a bit spiritual, is that at some point when we move along in our journey, not just our careers, we needed to step back and say, you know what, let's not try to control everything, but just do what feels right. Yeah, there's a bit of insecurity, uncertainty. Am I going to be able to survive? What will others think? But you know what? If we can just release ourselves a little bit, again, I'm on this journey with this business right now, and it's getting a little scary for me because I'm starting to do some things that I don't know where I'm going to wind up. But I feel good about the choices I'm making and I'm trusting the process because I can see the end. And I think that's really who you are. And that's why we're resonating so much on this conversation.
I think so. And I'll share a couple of other things. One of the other things that depression taught me was, and I think it's related to vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
is that you can sweep all you want under the rug, but it's coming back out. It's only a matter of time until it comes back out. And you were talking about my being a positive person. I actually think there's cause and effect there. If we don't go through nightmares, how can we expect to recognize and appreciate everything that's not nightmarish? Um, I don't want to be misunderstood. My dad's been gone a little over 10 years. I positively revere that man, but he was a Marine, and what he preached was if you can't finish something by yourself, don't start it. And then I experienced depression. And all of a sudden, all these people who I certainly knew showed up to just be there and be supportive, not by necessarily doing anything, just by letting me know they were present. And I thought, wow, I have the latitude to do things on my own if I want, but I don't have to do anything alone. And it sounds ridiculous to say that now, but it was a revelation for me.
We're
And
not
that,
alone.
no, no,
And so we're on
we
this
don't
voyage
have to be.
together. Oh, Mark, this has been so inspiring. And I so appreciate the fact we just kind of spitball back and forth, not knowing exactly where this is going. Again, I do this because I'm honestly curious about people's stories and their insights they can bring forward, because primarily it inspires me. And I do hope and trust to my listeners through these conversations, you pick up some bit of wisdom, either through what Mark shares, what I share, or maybe on your own. So, Mark, I want to thank you, and I would offer you the floor one last time to share a bit with my audience before we close.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I don't feel like I'm someone who's in any position to dispense advice, but I would very strongly suggest to people that fear is another energy. Actually, I heard one of my favorite philosophers, Mike Tyson, say this. Fear is another energy. What you have to do is learn to channel it. Doesn't mean it goes away, doesn't mean you won't feel it, but you have to channel it and let it work for you. And if you do that, there's always something on the other side of it. And I actually see it as cause and effect. So believe in yourself. That's my admonition. Believe in yourself.
Beautiful, inspirational words. And Mark, I do want to just thank you again for dropping it on the podcast. I want to wish you well and continued success. And thank you again.
Okay, and I thank you, Deb, and I look forward to talking with you again sometime.